This is Tomoko Tanaka, the Lee family's Japanese teacher. Her schedule for the day is Mark Lee at 9 a.m., Karen Lee at 12 p.m., Ben Lee at 6 p.m. Listen to the greeting exchange between the three pairs. Pay attention to the time of day.
田中先生、おはようございます。
リーさん、おはようございます。
こんにちは。
リーさん、こんにちは。
先生、こんばんは。
ベン君、こんばんは。
Once more with the English translation.
田中先生、おはようございます。
Good morning, Miss Tanaka.
リーさん、おはようございます。
Good morning, Mr. Lee.
こんにちは。
Good afternoon.
リーさん、こんにちは。
Good afternoon, Miss Lee.
先生、こんばんは。
Good evening, teacher.
ベン君、こんばんは。
Good evening, Ben.
Let's take a closer look at each of these expressions.
In the first conversation, do you remember how Mark says, Good morning, Miss Tanaka?
田中先生、おはようございます。
First is
田中先生。
Miss Tanaka.
田中先生。
First, Mark addresses his teacher.
田中先生。
This starts with the teacher's family name.
田中。田中。田中。
After this is
先生。
teacher.
先生。先生。先生。
Note, when
先生。
is used as a suffix, the meaning will depend on the context, as it can be attached to the names of teachers, doctors, lawyers, and politicians. In the case of
田中先生。
it translates as Miss, since she's a private teacher and the situation is less formal. Together, it's
田中先生。
Miss Tanaka.
田中先生。
Next is
おはようございます。
meaning good morning.
おはようございます。おはようございます。
There are two parts to this expression.
おはよ
And
うございます。
first is
おはよう
it comes from the adjective
早い。
meaning early.
おはよ
Pronunciation note. Notice the prolonged pronunciation of the vowel at the end of
うおはよ
listen again.
うおはよ
This is called the long vowel. Second is
うございます。
a polite form of the verb to be or to exist.
ございます。
Together,
おはようございます。
literally means early it is, but it translates as good morning.
おはようございます。
In Japanese, there are different levels of formality. This expression is formal. For informal situations, you can simply say the first part,
おはよ
good morning.
うおはよう
Altogether,
田中先生、おはようございます。
literally, Miss Tanaka, good morning. But in more natural English, good morning, Miss Tanaka.
田中先生、おはようございます。
Do you remember how the teacher says, Good morning, Mr. Lee?
リーさん、おはようございます。
First is
リーさん、
Mr. Lee.
リーさん、
This starts with Mark's family name, Lee. In Japanese,
リー、リー、リー、
after this is
さん、
a polite suffix attached to a person's name.
さ、ん、さん、
The suffix can be used with any gender. In Mark's case, it translates as Mr. Together,
リーさん、
Mr. Lee.
リーさん、
Next is
おはようございます。
good morning.
おはようございます。おはようございます。
Altogether, it's
リーさん、おはようございます。
good morning, Mr. Lee.
リーさん、おはようございます。
In the second conversation, which takes place at noon, do you remember how Karen says, good afternoon?
こんにちは。
こんにちは。
means good afternoon.
こんにちは。こんにちは。こんにちは。
Consists of two parts. First is
こんにち。
a formal way of saying today.
こんにち
Second is the particle,
は、
the topic marking particle.
は、
Think of it like as for in the expression as for today. Together
こんにちは。
literally means as for today, but it translates as good afternoon or hello, depending on the context.
こんにちは。
Note the pronunciation of
は、
here. It's pronounced wa instead of ha when used as a particle. Also note, when pronouncing this word,
こんにち。
be sure to pronounce the
ん、
sound.
こんにち。
Do you remember how Miss Tanaka says, good afternoon, Miss Lee?
リーさん、こんにちは。
Tanaka Sensei calls Karen Lee.
リーさん、
This starts with Karen's family name, Lee.
リー、リー、リー、
After this is
さん、
a polite suffix attached to a person's name.
さん、
The suffix can be used with any gender. In Karen's case, it translates as Miss. Together,
リーさん、
Miss Lee.
リーさん、
Next is
こんにちは。
good afternoon.
こんにちは。
Altogether, it's
リーさん、こんにちは。
good afternoon, Miss Lee.
リーさん、こんにちは。
In the third conversation, which takes place in the evening at 6 p.m., do you remember how Ben says, good evening, teacher?
先生、こんばんは。
When addressing his teacher, Ben simply uses
先生、
without adding her name. People often address their teachers by the title,
先生、
without attaching it to a name when it's clear which teacher they're talking to. Next is the greeting,
こんばんは。
meaning good evening.
こんばんは。こんばんは。こんばんは。
Consists of two parts. First is
今晩、
meaning this evening.
今晩
Second is the particle,
は、
the topic marking particle.
は、
Think of it like as for in the expression as for this evening. Together
こんばんは。
literally means as for this evening, but it translates as good evening. Pronunciation note. When pronouncing this word, be sure to clearly enunciate the
ん、
sound in.
こんばんは。
Altogether, Ben says,
先生、こんばんは。
do you remember how the teacher says, good evening, Ben?
ベン君こんばんは。
First is
ベン君、
Ben.
ベン君、
This starts with Ben's name in Japanese.
ベン、ベン、ベン、
After this is
君、
a suffix attached to a person's name.
く、ん、君、
It is often used to address males with whom the speaker has a close relationship, who are younger than the speaker, or who are of lower status than the speaker. In this case, the teacher, the speaker, is of higher social status than Ben, the student. There is no equivalent in English. Instead, the translation is contextual. In this case, there is no corresponding English translation, and
ベン君、
simply translates as Ben. Together it's
ベン君、こんばんは。
Good evening, Ben.
ベン君こんばんは。
Konnichiwa is the most general greeting and the closest to hello in English. It can be used in the morning or even at night. When including a person's name in a greeting, it's more common to say the person's name before the greeting. In addition, using a person's name in a greeting may come across as more formal. In informal situations, it's not so common to say someone's name when greeting them. Let's review the greetings. Listen and repeat or speak along with me. おはようございます。おはようございます。こんにちは。こんにちは。こんばんは。こんばんは。田中先生、おはようございます。田中先生、おはようございます。先生、こんばんは。先生、こんばんは。おはよう。おはよう。Did you notice how I used the shortened version of good morning? おはよう。
In informal situations,
おはようございます。
is often shortened to
おはよう。おはよ
Please note that this abbreviated form should be avoided when speaking with people whom you don't know very well, who are older than you, or who may be regarded as your superior. You should be aware of this shortened greeting, but you don't need it for this lesson.
Let's review. Respond to the prompts by speaking aloud. Then repeat after me, focusing on pronunciation. Ready? Do you remember the polite way to say, Good morning? おはようございます。おはようございます。Do you remember how to say, Good afternoon? こんにちは。こんにちは。Do you remember how to say, Good evening? こんばんは。こんばんは。
Let's practice. Imagine you're Ben, and you're in morning class. Respond by saying, Miss Tanaka, good morning. Ready?
ベン君おはようございます。
田中先生、おはようございます。
Listen again and repeat.
田中先生、おはようございます。 田中先生、おはようございます。
Let's try another. Imagine you're Mark, and you're in afternoon class. Respond by saying, Hello. Ready?
こんにちは。
こんにちは。
Listen again and repeat.
こんにちは。こんにちは。
Let's try one more. Imagine you're Karen, and you meet your neighbor. Respond by saying, Good evening. Ready?
こんばんは。
こんばんは。
Listen again and repeat.
こんばんは。こんばんは。